Hi, welcome to the Scribe Studio. I'm Mark Walker, and I'm here with Brendan Peterson.
Hi, Mark.
Brendan, thanks for coming back and spending some more time with us.
My pleasure.
Today, we're going to be talking with Brendan about the Insight connector for Scribe Online. So, Brendan, why don't you start us off with a little explanation about the Insight connector and why you might need it and what is it?
Yeah, so the Insight connector is, like the name implies, it connects Scribe Online with Insight. So there's a lot of situations where you might need an adapter that Insight has or a connector that Online has.
Right.
And there's no, we're generally not going to port one of the connectors down to an adapter or an adapter up to a connector. So you want to be able to leverage both sides of that equation. And the Insight connector gives us the ability to have Insight feed data up to Online or Online feed data back down. So you can have a two-way sync between the two.
All right, so you're talking about connectors and adapters. So connectors are what we call them on Scribe Online,
Yes.
and we call them adapters on Scribe Insight.
Yep.
They fulfill the same purpose. Now, for some of those, like for Dynamics CRM and Salesforce, we have a connector on Scribe Online and we have an adapter on Insight.
Right.
But in
But
other
not
situations, we don't. So why don't you take us through a couple of those
Yeah, so you might be
examples.
like, let's take for example, I have Dynamics AX, so I want to have
Okay. That's an Insight adapter.
Insight adapter, and I want to tie that into Marketo. So I've got a marketing automation system that I want to use in Online.
Okay.
And I want to be able to share the data between the two. So maybe I'm using the CRM module of AX, and I want to take some data. I have a new lead come in through Marketo. I want that to get down to my AX system. And I want that to happen
French?
automatically. Yeah, so if that happens, then I'm able to use that Insight piece for the adapter to write data in.
Okay.
And it's mainly about writing data in. You can always pull data out of SQL. I mean, Online has all those technology connectors, but sometimes it's the reverse side of that equation. You never want to push data directly into a SQL database for something like AX.
So generally speaking, you'd use this Insight connector where you've got connectivity in the Scribe Insight platform, and the other half of the equation, you've got connectivity in Scribe Online. You need to be able to use both of those endpoints.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So how does this Insight connector actually work?
So the way it works is it's kind of cool. So it basically gloms onto another connection inside of Online. So if I'm like the Marketo one,
Right.
I take that Insight connector in Online and I associate it with the Marketo connection. What the Insight connector does then is twofold. First of all, it lets you make a copy of that metadata from that connection you're working with.
Okay.
So if I'm with Marketo, I've got leads and opportunities and activities,
Right.
and it basically goes down to it's only on-premise agents, so it has to be a Scribe Online agent installed on-premise.
Okay.
And it creates a schema, an XML schema for each of the entities that it finds in that associated connection.
Oh, so you'll get a schema file. If you're used to working with Scribe Insight, you're probably familiar with those, or you might be for other reasons.
Yeah.
But you'll get one schema file for each one of the entities that's found in the associated connection.
Exactly. So it brings that down to the agent. And then the other thing it does is it communicates back and forth via Microsoft message queuing.
Okay.
So again, anyone who's familiar with Insight knows queue-based integrations.
Right.
But for those of you who aren't, Microsoft message queuing, it's a native Microsoft feature. It's in every instance of Windows. You just turn it on, really easy. And the cool thing is that the Insight connector, it has the ability to have two separate queues. It has one that it's reading from and one that it's writing to, and it can create those automatically. So you could actually theoretically use this for things outside of just Insight. It really is just moving XML data between Microsoft message queues.
So you're saying you could use this Insight connector to make Scribe Online talk with a Microsoft message queue if you weren't using Insight?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, good. So do you have a couple of examples you can show us?
I do. So the example I've got for us today is Exact Target and XML. So it's just basically, I've got an XML file I need to get up into Exact Target.
Okay.
There is no native connectivity that I can do it with this XML, and there's no native technology XML connector in Online.
Okay.
So what I've got is inside of here in Online, I've got my connections created. I've got my Exact Target connection, and I've got my XML connection. And this is the Scribe Insight connector. And I can see, like I mentioned, I just associate it with some connection. So this drop-down gives me all the different connections that are available on the organization.
All right.
And I define what queues I want to read from, what queues I want to write to. And kind of alluded to this, but like if I put in a new queue name, if I put a 2 in here and save it, it'll create that queue for me.
So these are the names of the Microsoft message queues that you want to use.
Yeah.
And so Microsoft message queuing has to be installed on the same computer where your Scribe Online agent is installed. Sort of?
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, it does in theory.
Okay.
There's some message queuing has some kind of, you have outbound queues, you have link servers. So there's some,
okay.
if you know a little bit about it, you could probably get away with having it just in the network. But
I got it.
The easiest
The
way
simplest setup is to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I mean, and for the simplest setup, I put this on my Scribe Insight server. So I've got Scribe Insight installed.
Okay.
I've got my agents running here, and I've got within my setup, if I go to that particular agent, so I'll find here, go in here, there we go. So under connectors, I've got my Scribe Insight connector, and I've got my associated XML with all the entities from that connection.
Okay.
So I associate it with the exact target connection inside of Scribe Online. It comes down here, it creates all those same entities, and I'm able to then work with them inside the workbench.
Okay.
So inside the workbench, it's just XML to XML is what I'm doing. So I'm picking, my source data is XML in this case. My target connection is a message queue going back to the Scribe Online queue, which is what I'm reading from.
All right.
And I just have it set up to say when I have files get dropped in, push them up. So let's go ahead inside of here, and I can actually show you how this works. So if I go, I've got this linked up to Dropbox, which is, I thought it was kind of cool personally, but I'm going to basically take two different XML files that are sitting out here, and I'm going to drop them in to my Dropbox folder. So what this is actually doing is it's going to link up. Dropbox is going to push the files down to that Insight server. I've got a file integration process that's going to pick them up. I'm going to see them get pulled out of that that Dropbox folder.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then they're going to get put into my Microsoft Message queue. So now they're being taken out.
So Insight's picking them up off of Dropbox and with a file integration process, turning those around through a DTS and putting them into a message queue.
Yeah.
Which then makes them available for the Scribe Online system to pluck them out of the message queue.
Exactly.
Okay.
So in here I can see that I've got a whole bunch of messages that get added to that Scribe Online queue.
Okay.
And a couple of cool things is also, the power of Insight. I took those two messages and I have 8 XML messages I'm creating from it. So they've actually it's got multiple values inside each XML.
Yeah.
So I'm taking that apart, I'm splitting it. So I'm using some of the Insight features that don't exist, obviously, in Scribe Online to do this because I don't have XML connectivity.
Right.
But I've got that there. And then inside of Online, really, it's a very simple setup where I'm going to be able to look at here. I've got querying that alert, so that's what the XML schema is associated with.
Okay.
If I look at the Insight query side, it just gives me a list of all the entities out of there. So it just gives me everything that I created a schema for, I've got in this UI. And then when I map it, because I'm mapping it to the associated connection, I can just do a quick auto link, or I can add formulas like I have here. So I could just say, select all, auto link, and walk away and be done with it. Or here I want to make sure if, because it's different types of messages that are coming across, I want to put some value in there so I have just, not applicable for where it is not applicable.
Okay.
So super easy.
Well, nothing's that easy.
Nothing's that easy, but once you do it the first time, it gets easier because there are some gotchas within here.
I think conceptually it's pretty easy, but there's a few setup steps, and you can't really miss any one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So you have to make sure that your associated connection name, when you get these messages across, you can see here it's got connection name _ entity name. That's important. So that's how you have to name these.
So your message label. Is that what you're pointing out? What column?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so you have to make sure some of those go hand in hand. But it's also good because I did a video the other day about this that goes into a little more detail around exactly what steps to follow.
Right.
So that might
that video is available in our Inside Track subscription.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A little bit longer form one.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so any other tips and tricks you might have for people about the naming conventions of these files or
it's really
metadata?
Just, you have to make sure that, for when you make the message label, it's not like Insight where you have control over what it's going to be. It has to be that associated connection name _ the entity name. So it's very specific for how you have to get that set up. And then refreshing metadata, you just have to go through a right cascade. So I got the associated connection, I have to refresh first. That then gives me a new set of metadata. I refresh the Insight connection, and it looks at the new metadata from the associated connection. So there's a right cascading, series of steps
You got to do that. Refreshing metadata, you have to do it in the proper order.
Yeah.
So you're saying start with
the associated connection and then work
in
your way
Scribe
back.
Online.
Yep.
Work your way down to Insight and the schema files.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else that we should tell people about it?
No, I mean, it's just, it's the first time you go through it, it's a little bit tough because there's a lot of steps you got to go through.
Right.
Once you do it first time, it's really a cake after that. It's really not a big deal. It's just the first time you go through it, like anything, it's a little difficult.
Okay. Well, great. Well, Brendan, thanks a lot for sharing your information
absolutely.
and knowledge with us.